flame hardly moved. It stood on a bronze candlestick in the tower of the hand, casting a warm circle across polished oak, parchment sealed with red wax, and the carved lion that guarded the arm of a chair. Beyond the narrow window, Blackwater Bay reflected 1,000 scattered lights from ships resting at anchor beneath the walls of King's Landing. The city had settled into its uneasy sleep, but one pair of green eyes remained awake, studying roofs, towers, and streets that vanished into darkness. This is where our journey begins, inside the quiet hours of a castle that has seen kings crowned, traitors executed, and dynasties broken. Tonight's gentle tale asks a question that sounds simple, but grows more complicated the longer you sit beside that candle. Was Cersei Lannister truly the smartest player in the Game of Thrones? Or has history mistaken calculation for cruelty? If you have listened before, quietly remember which night this is for you. If this is your first visit, let it simply be Night 1. As the city breathes beneath the Red Keep, you settle into the silence beside the Queen, who rarely allowed herself the comfort of sleep. The story ahead moves slowly, following the written histories of George R.R. Martin's world, rather than hurried legend lingering where old chronicles disagree, and where human hearts reveal more than swords ever could. There will be victories won without battles, defeats hidden beneath triumphs, and choices that seemed brilliant in one season only to become disastrous in the next. Long before wildfire, before the High Sparrow, before the Walk of Atonement or the whispers surrounding the Valonqar, there was simply a young girl born beneath the golden banners of House Lannister. To understand the Queen, you must first understand the child who learned that power and love were rarely offered together. Why did one prophecy shape an entire lifetime when the rulers of Westeros heard prophecies almost every generation? The question hangs quietly because Cersei Lannister was not the first noble to hear mysterious words about the future, nor would she be the last. House Targaryen filled its history with dragon dreams that foretold victories and disasters alike. Prince Daeron, later remembered as Daeron the Drunken, dreamed true before the tragedy at Ashford Meadow, while generations earlier King Aegon the Conqueror was said, according to later traditions, to have been guided by dreams concerning a darkness beyond the wall. Yet those visions inspired preparation more often than obsession. Cersei's prophecy achieved something different. It did not merely warn her about tomorrow. It quietly rewrote the meaning of every face she met for the rest of her life. Cersei entered the world in 266 AC at Casterly Rock, the immense fortress carved into the western coast where House Lannister had ruled since the Age of Heroes. She was born only moments before her twin brother Jaime, making them inseparable from their first breath. Their father, Lord Tywin Lannister, already stood among the greatest lords in the Seven Kingdoms, famous for restoring the wealth and discipline of his house after the weakness of his own father, Lord Tytos Lannister. Their mother, Joanna Lannister, belonged to the same proud bloodline and was remembered throughout the realm for intelligence, grace, and quiet strength. Visitors later remarked that Cersei carried much of Joanna's beauty, while Tywin believed both twins possessed uncommon promise. In those earliest years, nothing suggested that one child would inherit a sword while the other inherited only expectations. Casterly Rock itself shaped the imagination of every child, raised inside its halls. Unlike the Red Keep, which overlooked a noisy capital, the ancient Lannister seat rose above the sunset sea, its halls extending deep into the mountain, where veins of gold had enriched the family for thousands of years. The sea wind carried salt through narrow windows. Gulls circled the cliffs below, and miners disappeared each morning into tunnels older than memory. Everywhere young Cersei looked, she saw reminders that House Lannister had endured kings, invasions, and changing dynasties because wealth could purchase armies long after courage alone had failed. Gold-decorated cups, armor, banners, and even children's toys. It was impossible to grow up there without learning that influence often spoke more softly than steel, yet reached much farther. Why does so much of Cersei's childhood revolve around Jaime rather than Tywin himself? The answer begins with the strange closeness unique to twins who believed they reflected one another perfectly. Jaime and Cersei, dressed alike as children, played together, learned together, and reportedly delighted in confusing servants by exchanging clothes whenever they could manage the trick. In later years, Jaime would remember believing that they shared a single soul, divided into two bodies, a thought that reveals more about their bond than any court gossip ever could. Cersei looked at her brother and saw freedoms automatically granted to him because he had been born a son only moments after she had been born a daughter. The difference between them measured mere heartbeats. Yet Westeros treated those heartbeats as the distance between obedience and command. Lord Tywin did not encourage softness in any of his children. His household followed strict order. His bannermen respected him almost to the point of fear, and every lesson carried the expectation that a Lannister must never invite ridicule. The humiliation suffered under Lord Tytos still haunted Tywin, whose father's generosity had encouraged rebellious vassals like Houses Rhaen and Tarbeck before their destruction during the Rhaen-Tarbeck revolt. Those events occurred before Cersei's birth, yet their memory lingered in every corridor of Casterly Rock. Songs such as The Rains of Castamere reminded every guest exactly what happened to those who mistook Lannister patience for weakness. Growing up beneath that shadow, Cersei learned early that mercy without authority often invited contempt. In 273 AC, the family changed forever with the birth of Tyrion Lannister. Joanna died delivering her youngest child, and grief settled heavily over Casterly Rock. Tywin never forgave the loss in his heart, though he rarely spoke openly about it, and much of his bitterness came to rest upon the son who survived while Joanna did not. Cersei's resentment toward Tyrion took root astonishingly early, nourished by mourning, by whispered blame, and later by the prophecy she would hear as a girl. Jaime, despite loving both siblings in different ways, often stood between them as the only person capable of understanding each without entirely sharing their anger. One death inside a birthing chamber quietly altered the balance of one of the greatest houses in Westeros long before politics ever entered the story. Why did Cersei become convinced that the world belonged to men when her own father respected ability above nearly everything else? The contradiction is worth lingering over because Tywin admired competence wherever he found it, yet he remained thoroughly shaped by the customs of the Seven Kingdoms. Jaime trained with sword and lance because he was heir to Casterly Rock. Cersei learned courtesy, music, household management, diplomacy, and the careful arts expected of a noble bride because daughters strengthened alliances through marriage. She watched the same tutors instruct her brother in command, while she received lessons intended to prepare another lord's castle for her arrival. According to the laws and traditions of Westeros, this arrangement was ordinary. To Cersei, it felt like a theft, carried out so quietly that almost no one else noticed it happening. As she grew older, Cersei reportedly began borrowing Jaime's clothes in secret and cutting her hair short enough that strangers occasionally mistook one twin for the other from a distance. The stories survive because they reveal a desire deeper than childish games. Wearing a boy's tunic did not change inheritance law, but for a little while it allowed her to step into a life that seemed permanently closed. Martin's histories never claim she became a hidden warrior or secretly mastered knightly combat. Instead, they show a sharper frustration. She did not necessarily wish to become Jaime. She wished the realm would judge her mind before judging her sex, a wish that would follow her from Casterly Rock to King's Landing and shape nearly every political decision she later made. Before the candle burns much lower, another path begins to open in the darkness ahead. Somewhere beyond the walls of Casterly Rock waits an old fortune teller known as Maggie the Frog, whose small tent and unsettling words will leave a deeper wound than any sword ever could. It is curious that one brief meeting between a proud noble girl and a foreign woods witch would echo across decades, influencing queens, kings, and eventually the fate of the Iron Throne itself. The sea continues its slow rhythm against the cliffs below, the castle remains quiet, and the young lioness still believes that the future is something waiting to be conquered. She does not yet understand that from this point onward, every victory she claims will also feel like another step toward the future she is desperately trying to escape. Why did a single visit to an old woman living far below the dignity of great lords leave a scar that neither wealth nor power could ever erase? Many nobles in Westeros sought fortune tellers, woods witches, septons, and dream interpreters, yet few allowed a prophecy to govern every choice they made afterward. Cersei Lannister was still a girl when curiosity carried her beyond the polished halls of Casterly Rock toward the humble dwelling of Maggie the Frog. The journey itself mattered because it crossed an invisible border between two worlds. One belonged to banners, bloodlines, and castles. The other belonged to ancient fears that existed long before the Andal kings crossed the narrow sea. By the time Cersei returned, she would never again look at the future as something she could freely shape. The written histories agree that Maggie the Frog was a foreign woman, commonly described as a Maegi from across the narrow sea, though stories about her origins differ. She lived near Lannisport rather than inside Casterly Rock, and common people visited her for charms, remedies, and glimpses of what lay ahead. Cersei was accompanied by her friend Melara Heatherspoon, the daughter of one of Lord Tywin's bannermen, while another girl lost her nerve before reaching the old woman's home. Firelight flickered against rough stone walls instead of polished marble, and the smell of strange herbs filled the small room where Maggie received them. The contrast could not have been greater. A daughter of the richest house in Westeros had entered a place where gold carried no authority. According to Cersei's own memories in A Feast for Crows, she demanded answers rather than politely requesting them. Maggie warned the girls that they would not enjoy hearing the truth, but Cersei's pride pushed her forward. She first asked whether she would marry Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the handsome heir to King Aerys II, whom she had admired from afar. The answer came swiftly. "Never," the old woman replied. "You will wed the king." The distinction seemed insignificant to a child. In truth, it quietly foretold the collapse of House Targaryen, for Rhaegar would never wear the crown that instead passed briefly to his father before Robert Baratheon's rebellion swept the dynasty from power. Why does that first answer matter more than it first appears? At the time of the prophecy, Robert Baratheon was not king. He was merely Lord of Storm's End, heir to House Baratheon, fostered alongside Eddard Stark under Lord Jon Arryn in the Vale. King Aerys II still ruled from the Iron Throne. Prince Rhaegar remained heir apparent, and no rebellion had begun. The prophecy therefore reached years beyond the political horizon visible to any ordinary observer. Readers know the events that followed. In 282 AC, Prince Rhaegar carried off Lyanna Stark. Whether by abduction or mutual choice remains one of the great questions of the saga, and Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing demanding justice. King Aerys answered with executions instead of mercy, and the realm began sliding toward war. Cersei's next question revealed even more about her heart than her future. She asked whether she would become queen. Maggie answered, "I." For one brief moment, the young lioness believed she'd received exactly what she wanted. Then came the second half of the sentence. "Queen you shall be until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear." Those words became the center of Cersei's inner life. Every young noblewoman entering court thereafter could become the mysterious rival. Beauty ceased to be something she possessed. It became something that threatened to replace her. Martin never identifies this younger and more beautiful queen with certainty in the novels. Cersei herself eventually becomes convinced that Margaery Tyrell fulfills the prophecy, largely because Margaery marries King Tommen after Joffrey's death and quickly wins affection throughout King's Landing. Yet the books leave room for other possibilities. Some readers argue that Daenerys Targaryen better matches the description, a younger queen whose arrival from Essos promises to overturn the political order entirely. Others have suggested Sansa Stark, or even another figure whose role has not yet fully unfolded in the published novels. The uncertainty is deliberate. Like many prophecies in Martin's world, the danger lies not only in whether the prediction proves true, but in how belief changes the person who hears it. Why did Cersei ask about children before asking about kingdoms? The question reminds you that she was still a child herself, despite her confidence. Maggie answered with chilling precision. The king would have 20 children, she said, while Cersei would have only 3. Gold shall be their crowns, and gold their shrouds. In hindsight, the words seem painfully clear. King Robert fathered numerous bastards across the 7 kingdoms, among them Edric Storm, Maya Stone, Gendry, Bella, and others, remembered or forgotten depending on the source. Cersei's own children would indeed number 3, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, each golden-haired, each wearing the unmistakable Lannister appearance that eventually exposed the truth of their parentage. The prophecy concerning the golden shrouds is especially unsettling because it offers no comfort about sequence or cause. Joffrey dies at his wedding feast in 300 AC after drinking poisoned wine during the celebration later remembered as the Purple Wedding. Myrcella survives in the published novels but suffers terrible injury in Dorne during the failed plot surrounding Princess Arianne Martell. Tommen remains king at the end of a dance with dragons, though danger closes around him from every direction. The television adaptation carries these stories much further, but the written canon stops before their final outcomes. Even so, Cersei never needed complete fulfillment of the prophecy to become consumed by it. Fear began its work long before fate finished its own. Then came the final question, one Cersei later admitted she had not intended to ask until the words escaped her mouth. She asked when she would die. Maggie answered only after grasping the girl's hand with surprising strength. When your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you. Unlike the earlier predictions, this one used a single High Valyrian word. Valonqar means little brother. The phrase immediately narrowed Cersei's suspicions toward Tyrion, who had entered the world after her and whom she already associated with her mother's death. Yet Martin carefully leaves the wording broader than Cersei allows herself to believe. Why has the identity of the Valonqar remained one of the greatest mysteries in all of A Song of Ice and Fire? Tyrion appears the obvious candidate because he is literally Cersei's younger brother and openly wishes her dead after escaping King's Landing. But Jaime is also technically younger than Cersei, born moments after his twin sister. The wording never specifies which little brother. Some readers even note that many characters in the novels have younger brothers, though the grammar strongly favors a deeply personal connection. Martin has never confirmed the answer. More importantly, Cersei's certainty that Tyrion is destined to kill her poisons every interaction they share, making the prophecy dangerous, whether or not she has interpreted it correctly. When the girls left Maggie's home, another tragedy quietly began taking shape. Melara Heatherspoon had asked whether she would marry Jaime Lannister, revealing feelings she had kept hidden from Cersei. The old woman answered that Melara would never marry him and instead would die that very night. Years later, during Cersei's memories, in a feast for crows, the queen recalls pushing Melara down a well after they departed. The confession appears not as courtroom testimony, but as private recollection, making it one of the clearest glimpses into Cersei's childhood, long before politics hardened her completely. Whether fear, jealousy, or desperate secrecy drove the act, it marks one of the earliest moments where Cersei chooses control over compassion. As dawn slowly approached Casterly Rock, no servant, guard, or lord could have guessed what had truly changed. The girl who returned looked exactly the same as the one who had left only hours before. The sea still crashed against the cliffs, the mines still echoed beneath the mountain, and Lord Tywin still governed the Westerlands with absolute confidence. Yet inside Cersei, the future had become an enemy that could be hunted but never escaped. Every smile from another woman, every unexpected death, every political alliance, and every younger face would now be measured against the whisper of an old Maggie who had spoken beside a dying fire. Why did Cersei spend years dreaming of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, only to become the wife of the man who destroyed his dynasty? The answer lies in one of the greatest turning points in the history of Westeros, where private hopes disappeared beneath the thunder of armies. Before Robert's rebellion, the Seven Kingdoms still bowed to House Targaryen, nearly 3 centuries after Aegon the Conqueror had forged the realm with Balerion the Black Dread. King Aerys II occupied the Iron Throne, though by the late 270s AC, his reign had become increasingly erratic and cruel. At court, Prince Rhaegar was admired throughout the realm for his learning, courtesy, and skill at arms, standing in quiet contrast to his unstable father. For a proud young daughter of House Lannister, there seemed no greater future than becoming the wife of the heir to the Iron Throne. Tywin Lannister certainly entertained that possibility. Having served for nearly 20 years as Hand of the King, he governed much of the realm's daily affairs, while Aerys withdrew further into suspicion and resentment. The relationship between King and Hand gradually deteriorated as Aerys came to resent the admiration Tywin inspired throughout the Seven Kingdoms. During the grand tournament celebrating Prince Viserys' birth in 276 AC, Tywin reportedly proposed a marriage between Cersei and Prince Rhaegar. King Aerys rejected the match publicly. According to the World of Ice and Fire, he remarked that servants do not marry into the royal family, a calculated insult aimed less at Cersei than at Tywin himself. Few moments wounded the Lord of Casterly Rock more deeply. The rejection left lasting marks upon father and daughter alike. Tywin resigned the office of Hand in 281 AC and returned to Casterly Rock, ending one of the longest and most capable administrations in Targaryen history. Cersei never forgot the humiliation. In later years, she convinced herself that Rhaegar would have appreciated her intelligence, her beauty, and her ambition far more than Robert Baratheon ever could. Whether that belief reflected reality is impossible to know. The written histories portray Rhaegar as reserved, dutiful, and deeply thoughtful, qualities that might have admired Cersei's strengths while recoiling from her pride. The marriage never came close to becoming reality once Aerys had spoken. Why did everything collapse so quickly after years of uneasy peace? The realm had survived growing tensions before, yet the events beginning in 282 AC unfolded with astonishing speed. Prince Rhaegar departed with Lyanna Stark, whose disappearance became the spark that ignited rebellion. Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing, demanding Rhaegar answer for what he believed was kidnapping. King Aerys imprisoned Brandon, summoned his father Lord Rickard Stark, and executed both in horrifying fashion. Rickard burned alive while Brandon strangled himself, trying to save him. The king then demanded that Jon Arryn surrender his wards, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. Instead, Jon Arryn raised the banners of the Vale, beginning the conflict remembered as Robert's Rebellion. Throughout the war, House Lannister remained curiously absent. Tywin neither declared openly for King Aerys nor joined Robert's rebels, choosing instead to preserve his strength, while the outcome remained uncertain. Later generations often interpreted this as cynical opportunism, yet it also reflected Tywin's extraordinary patience. The Westerlands remained untouched while battles consumed the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and the Crownlands. Robert won decisive victories at Summerhall and later at the Battle of the Bells in Stony Sept, where Lord John Connington failed to capture him, despite searching the town house by house. Then came the Battle of the Trident, where Prince Rhaegar fell beneath Robert's warhammer, his breastplate scattering rubies into the river that still bears the memory of that famous duel. For Cersei, the death of Rhaegar meant more than the loss of a prince she had admired from afar. It ended the future she'd imagined before Maggie's prophecy ever came true. The old woman's words now began unfolding with uncomfortable precision. She had been told she would never marry Rhaegar. Instead, she would marry the king. When Robert Baratheon claimed the Iron Throne after the sack of King's Landing in 283 AC, the prophecy no longer sounded impossible. It sounded inevitable. Fate, which had once seemed distant, now walked beside her. Why did Tywin arrive at King's Landing only when the war had already been decided? Historians inside Martin's world debate the timing because it transformed House Lannister from uncertain observers into indispensable victors. Tywin marched to the capital with approximately 12,000 men, presenting himself as a loyal servant supposedly arriving to defend King Aerys. Grand Maester Pycelle urged Aerys to admit the Lannister army through the city gates, arguing that Tywin had finally come to aid the crown. Lord Varys warned the king against trusting him. Aerys ignored the warning. Once inside, Lannister soldiers sacked the city in one of the bloodiest days King's Landing had ever witnessed. During the sack, Sir Gregor Clegane murdered Princess Elia Martell and her young son Prince Aegon, while Sir Amory Lorch killed Princess Rhaenys. Their deaths became among the darkest crimes committed during the rebellion and poisoned relations between houses Lannister and Martell for decades. At almost the same moment, Sir Jaime Lannister slew King Aerys II inside the Red Keep after the king ordered the city burned with hidden caches of wildfire. Jaime's action saved hundreds of thousands of lives, yet the realm remembered only that a sworn member of the King's Guard had killed the king he had sworn to protect. The name Kingslayer followed him from that day onward. Cersei saw only that her twin had survived, while the dynasty she once expected to join had vanished forever. Not long afterward, the marriage between Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister was arranged. Politically, it made perfect sense. Robert needed the wealth of House Lannister to stabilize a kingdom exhausted by war, while Tywin sought to restore his family's place at the center of royal power after years of estrangement from Aerys. The marriage also helped unite former enemies beneath a single crown. Yet beneath the ceremony lay very different expectations. Robert believed he was marrying because kings required queens. Cersei believed she was finally taking the throne the destiny had promised, even if it came beside a different husband than she had once imagined. The beginning of the marriage contained moments of genuine possibility. Robert was young, charismatic, and celebrated as the warrior who had overthrown the dragons. Songs praised his victories, and the realm admired his immense strength with hammer and sword. Cersei herself later recalls asking Robert on their wedding night whether he still thought about Lyanna Stark. His answer came after he had been drinking. He whispered Lyanna's name instead of hers. Whether every detail of that memory is perfectly preserved through Cersei's bitter recollection cannot be proven, but its emotional truth shaped everything that followed. In her mind, she had entered the marriage already competing against a woman who had died before it began. Why did that single whispered name matter so much? Because it convinced Cersei that she had not married a man who failed to love her. Over time, she believed she had married one who never intended to love her at all. Robert carried the memory of Lyanna Stark like an open wound throughout his reign, idealizing the woman he believed had been stolen from him. Cersei answered by retreating toward the one person who had always represented certainty in her life, Jaime. The choice would remain hidden from the realm, but its consequences would eventually shake the foundations of the Iron Throne itself. When the royal procession finally departed Casterly Rock for King's Landing, the sea winds faded behind them and new sounds replaced the familiar surf. Wheels rolled across the King's Road, banners snapped in the breeze, and thousands of hooves carried the future queen toward the largest city in Westeros. Ahead stood the Red Keep, the Iron Throne forged from dragon fire, and a husband who wore a crown won through rebellion rather than inheritance. Cersei believed she'd reached the summit of power exactly as Maggie had foretold. She could not yet see that the game she was about to enter would demand far more than beauty, birth, or even prophecy. It would reward those who understood people better than they understood themselves. Why did the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms so quickly discover that wearing a crown did not mean possessing power? Many readers remember Cersei as one of the dominant political figures of King's Landing, but the first years of Robert Baratheon's reign tell a quieter story. The throne belonged to Robert. The government still relied heavily upon Lord Jon Arryn as Hand of the King. Lord Stannis Baratheon rebuilt the royal fleet from Dragonstone, while Renly Baratheon grew into one of the realm's most charming young lords. Cersei entered a court already filled with experienced statesmen whose influence had been earned over decades rather than inherited through marriage. If she wished to shape the kingdom, she first had to understand how power truly moved through the Red Keep. The royal court differed profoundly from Casterly Rock. The Lannister seat had revolved around one family whose authority rarely faced serious challenge. King's Landing gathered ambitious nobles from every corner of Westeros beneath a single roof. The small council included Lord Jon Arryn, Grand Maester Pycelle, Master of Coin Peter Baelish, Master of Whisperers Varys, and other officials whose loyalties were often divided between king, kingdom, house, and personal ambition. Every audience chamber, feast, hunt, and council meeting became an opportunity for alliances to strengthen or quietly dissolve. Gold still mattered, but information mattered even more. Cersei began learning that secrets could purchase victories no army could ever win. Robert himself seemed almost relieved whenever government could be left to others. During the rebellion, he had thrived in motion, leading charges, winning loyalty, and inspiring soldiers through personal courage. Peace demanded different talents: taxation, appointments, grain shipments, harbor maintenance, disputes among bannermen, and negotiations with the free cities interested him far less than hunting, tournaments, drinking, and memories of battle. Jon Arryn carried much of that burden with remarkable patience, preserving stability throughout the early years of the new dynasty. Cersei observed something important. The king possessed enormous legal authority, yet another man quietly ensured the realm actually functioned. Why did Cersei begin relying more heavily upon Jaime, instead of attempting to repair her marriage? The answer reaches back long before Robert ever claimed the Iron Throne. Jaime had joined the Kingsguard in 281 AC at only 15 years of age after King Aerys II unexpectedly appointed him, an act that prevented Tywin from keeping his heir at Casterly Rock. Some historians inside the world suspect Aerys intended the appointment partly as another insult toward Tywin, depriving him of the son destined to inherit House Lannister. Jaime's white cloak therefore became both an honor and a prison. When Robert retained him within the Kingsguard after the rebellion, despite the stain of kingslaying, Jaime remained permanently close to Cersei inside the Red Keep. The separation that marriage should have created never truly happened. Their forbidden relationship continued in secret despite every oath, law, and custom of the realm. The Kingsguard swore lifelong chastity as well as absolute loyalty to the king they protected. Incest itself stood condemned by both the faith of the Seven and the customs shared across nearly all the great houses of Westeros. Yet Jaime and Cersei increasingly treated themselves as exceptions to ordinary rules. Jaime later reflects repeatedly that Cersei had always seemed the other half of his own identity, while Cersei viewed Jaime as the one person whose loyalty required no negotiation. The secrecy surrounding their bond demanded constant caution, and paradoxically, that caution sharpened Cersei's political instincts. Every conversation had to conceal one truth while revealing another. Why did Robert never recognize what so many readers immediately notice? Within the novels, the answer rests partly in Robert's own nature. He seldom paid close attention to his children beyond occasional displays of affection or frustration. He accepted without question that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen belonged to him, because that was what every husband expected when his queen bore children. He also trusted old assumptions about noble families. Cersei's children displayed the unmistakable golden hair and green eyes common among the Lannisters, yet Robert himself came from generations in which Baratheons almost invariably produced black-haired offspring. That inconsistency would eventually attract Jon Arryn's attention, but Robert never troubled himself with genealogy. He preferred certainty over investigation. Joffrey Baratheon was born in 286 AC, roughly 3 years after Robert's coronation, followed later by Princess Myrcella and Prince Tommen. Officially, they stood second, third, and fourth in the line of succession after their father. Public celebrations accompanied each royal birth, strengthening the appearance of a secure new dynasty after years of civil war. Lords offered gifts, septons gave blessings, and ravens carried the news across the Seven Kingdoms. Cersei understood the political importance of producing heirs. Every healthy child reduced the likelihood of another succession crisis, resembling those that had repeatedly troubled House Targaryen. Unknown to nearly everyone, those very births also planted the seeds of the greatest succession dispute since the Dance of the Dragons. Martin's novels reveal one remarkable detail through Cersei's own point of view. Before Joffrey's birth, she once conceived Robert's child and chose to end the pregnancy. She remembers arranging for a woman to help her rid herself of the unborn baby before anyone discovered it. This event receives little attention from other characters because almost no one knows it happened. Yet it illuminates Cersei's state of mind. She'd already decided that Robert would never truly become her husband in the emotional sense. Her children would belong to Jaime or to no one. Why did Cersei invest so much effort in appearing the perfect queen, despite privately despising much of court life? Because appearances governed politics every bit as much as the decrees. She dressed magnificently during feasts, welcomed visiting lords, oversaw ceremonial duties, and represented royal dignity before foreign envoys and noble guests. Queens in Westeros exercised influence differently from kings. Their authority often flowed through marriages arranged, loyalties cultivated, charitable acts remembered, and access carefully controlled. Cersei excelled at reading the ambitions of those seeking favor. Long before she openly exercised political power, she quietly learned who desired offices, who sought marriages, who carried old grudges, and who talked too freely after enough wine. One man fascinated her almost from the beginning: Peter Baelish, better known throughout the realm as Littlefinger. Born to the modest House Baelish of the Fingers, he had risen astonishingly far through financial talent and relentless ambition. By Robert's reign, he served as Master of Coin, despite lacking the ancient bloodlines of most great counselors. His wit amused the king, his accounts satisfied Jon Arryn, and his network of obligations spread throughout King's Landing in ways almost no one fully appreciated. Cersei respected cleverness even when she distrusted its owner. Littlefinger, for his part, rarely revealed the full extent of his intentions to anyone. Equally mysterious stood Lord Varys, the eunuch known as the Spider. Officially, he served as Master of Whisperers, maintaining informants across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond the Narrow Sea. His little birds gathered secrets from servants, merchants, dock workers, innkeepers, and children whom powerful nobles scarcely noticed. Varys spoke softly, smiled often, and consistently presented himself as a humble servant of the realm rather than of any single ruler. Whether that claim reflected genuine loyalty remained one of the central questions surrounding his character. Cersei quickly recognized that Varys possessed something even gold could not reliably purchase. He knew things before other people realized there was anything worth knowing. Why did Cersei gradually become more dangerous while still holding so little formal authority? Because she was learning where real power lived. It did not always sit upon the Iron Throne. Sometimes it rested inside account books managed by Littlefinger, sealed letters carried by ravens, whispers gathered by Varys, or quiet conversations between Lord Jon Arryn and the king after council meetings ended. Cersei watched patiently, storing away every lesson. Years later, when the opportunity finally arrived to seize control herself, she would remember exactly which levers moved the kingdom and which merely created the illusion of command. Why did Eddard Stark fail where Cersei ultimately succeeded, even though he possessed the truth and she possessed only the secret? Few moments in A Song of Ice and Fire reveal the difference between honor and political instinct more clearly than the final weeks before Robert Baratheon's death. Lord Eddard Stark arrived in King's Landing in 298 AC to serve as Hand of the King after the sudden death of Jon Arryn. He brought with him the values that had governed Winterfell for decades: loyalty, honesty, justice, and open dealing. Cersei had spent 15 years learning an entirely different language, one spoken through hidden motives, careful timing, and the weaknesses people rarely admitted even to themselves. When these two worldviews finally collided, the outcome would reshape the Seven Kingdoms. Jon Arryn's death had already begun the investigation before Ned ever crossed the neck. The elderly hand had traveled repeatedly with Stannis Baratheon, examining the bloodlines recorded in Grand Maester Mallion's massive genealogical history, lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms. The question seemed harmless. Why did every recorded union between House Baratheon and House Lannister produce dark-haired children, while Robert's three supposed heirs all possessed unmistakable Lannister coloring? Jon Arryn's final words, "The seed is strong," puzzled nearly everyone who heard them. Only later would Ned understand that the old hand had left behind not a riddle, but a conclusion. Why did Cersei allow Jon Arryn and later Ned Stark to investigate without immediately eliminating them? The answer reveals one of her greatest strengths. She rarely acted before understanding exactly what another person knew. Jon Arryn died suddenly after falling ill, officially from a chill that settled in his lungs. Readers later learned through Peter Baelish and Lisa Arryn that Lisa herself poisoned her husband with the tears of Liz at Littlefinger's urging. Cersei had not arranged Jon Arryn's death, despite what many characters initially suspected. Yet she recognized that his inquiries had become dangerous. Instead of panicking, she watched carefully to see whether anyone else could complete the investigation. Ned Stark followed the same trail, almost step for step. He questioned armorers, servants, smiths, and old retainers who had known Robert's acknowledged bastards. He visited Gendry and Tobbo Mott's forge, observing the apprentice's thick black hair and powerful Baratheon features. He spoke with Grand Maester Pycelle, read the same genealogies Jon Arryn had studied, and gradually assembled the evidence piece by piece, and none of it depended upon magic or prophecy. It depended upon patient observation. Every legitimate Baratheon inherited black hair. Every child presented as Robert's by Cersei had golden hair. The conclusion became unavoidable. Why did Cersei answer Ned's accusation with honesty instead of denial? It remains one of the most remarkable conversations in the novels. When Ned confronted her in the Godswood outside the Red Keep, he already knew the truth. Cersei therefore abandoned pretense almost immediately. She admitted that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were Jaime's children, and confirmed that Robert had never fathered any of them. Then she asked the question that has echoed through countless discussions of her character. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground. It was not a boast spoken after victory. It was an explanation of the world as she genuinely understood it. The conversation also contains one of the most revealing admissions Cersei ever makes. She tells Ned that she once tried to love Robert. During the first year of their marriage, she believed affection might still grow between them despite the circumstances of their union. Then came the memory that had haunted her ever since their wedding night. Robert whispered Lyanna's name while drunk, reminding her once again that she had married a man whose heart belonged to someone already dead. Whether Cersei exaggerates other memories elsewhere in her narrative, this confession carries unusual weight because it offers no political advantage. She is explaining how disappointment slowly hardened into contempt. Why did Ned make the decision that sealed his own fate? Because Eddard Stark remained Eddard Stark until the very end. Rather than immediately informing Robert, Ned warned Cersei privately and urged her to flee the capital with her children before the king returned from hunting. He hoped to spare innocent lives while still preserving justice. The decision reflected every lesson he had learned from the executions ordered by Aerys II and from Robert's willingness to accept the murders of Rhaegar's young children after the sack of King's Landing. Ned would not become another lord who allowed children to die for political convenience. His mercy was genuine. It was also predictable. Cersei understood something about Robert that Ned underestimated. The king loved the hunt almost as much as battle, and he often drank heavily while pursuing boar or stag through the Kingswood. She did not need to guarantee his death. She merely needed fortune to lean in her direction. Lancel Lannister, Robert's young cousin and squire, supplied the king with exceptionally strong wine during the hunt, weakening his judgment and slowing his reactions. A massive boar finally gored Robert, inflicting the wounds that carried him back to the Red Keep, dying. Martin's text makes clear that Cersei encouraged the circumstances leading to the accident without pretending she controlled every movement of beast or man. It was a calculated risk rather than perfect certainty. Why was Robert's final decision so important? As he lay dying, the king dictated his will to Ned Stark. Robert named Ned Protector of the Realm until my son Joffrey came of age. Ned quietly altered the wording before sealing the document, replacing my son Joffrey with my rightful heir. The change reflected what Ned now knew about Joffrey's birth. Legally, he believed he was preserving the succession for Stannis Baratheon, Robert's eldest surviving brother, yet the parchment possessed authority only if others chose to honor it. In King's Landing, written law mattered less than armed men standing in the throne room. Why did Cersei appear so calm while the kingdom balanced on the edge of civil war? Because she'd spent years preparing for the possibility that Robert would die before she did. She secured the loyalty of key members of the court wherever she could. Grand Maester Pycelle consistently favored House Lannister, believing their stability preferable to chaos. The City Watch, commanded by Janos Slynt, outwardly served the crown but proved willing to follow whichever faction offered greater reward. Most importantly, Cersei understood Petyr Baelish far better than Ned did. She did not trust Littlefinger. She simply knew that trust was unnecessary if interests briefly aligned. The throne room confrontation after Robert's death remains one of the defining political scenes of the entire saga. Ned arrived carrying Robert's will, supported by a relatively small number of household guards. Beside him stood Petyr Baelish, who'd repeatedly promised that the City Watch would support Ned's claim to authority. Across the hall waited Cersei with Joffrey, members of the King's Guard including Sir Meryn Trant and Sir Boros Blount, and numerous Lannister supporters. When the moment came, Littlefinger placed a dagger beneath Ned's chin instead of defending him. Janos Slynt ordered the gold cloaks to slaughter Stark's men. In a matter of moments, law yielded to force. Why did Cersei win that day when so many others possessed greater military strength or better legal claims? She won because she correctly identified the decisive point long before anyone else. The outcome would not be determined by Robert's written will, by hereditary law, or by moral righteousness. It would be decided by whichever faction controlled the capital during the few uncertain hours after a king's death. By the time the rest of Westeros learned Robert Baratheon was gone, Cersei had already crowned Joffrey, imprisoned Eddard Stark, and transformed one family's secret into a kingdom-wide war that would consume nearly every great house in the Seven Kingdoms. Why did Cersei's greatest political victory immediately create a kingdom full of enemies? The answer reveals the strange price of seizing power in Westeros. Capturing the Iron Throne for Joffrey was one achievement. Convincing the Seven Kingdoms that his rule was legitimate proved to be a far more difficult task. Before Robert Baratheon's body had even grown cold in the great sept of Baelor, letters, ravens, rumors, and accusations were spreading in every direction. What had begun as one family's hidden secret rapidly became a succession crisis unlike anything the realm had witnessed since the Dance of the Dragons nearly 170 years earlier. Stannis Baratheon reacted first in legal terms rather than military ones. From Dragonstone, he declared that Robert's children were born of incest between Queen Cersei and Sir Jaime Lannister, making himself the lawful king as Robert's eldest surviving brother. Stannis based his claim upon hereditary law, not popularity. Throughout his life, he had believed that duty outweighed affection and succession followed rules rather than personal preference. Few great lords found him charming, but even his enemies rarely questioned his rigid commitment to justice. Cersei understood immediately that Stannis represented a uniquely dangerous opponent because he could not be bribed, flattered, or distracted by luxury. Renly Baratheon reached an entirely different conclusion. Younger than Stannis by several years and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands through Robert's grant, Renly claimed the Iron Throne for himself despite possessing the weaker legal right. His reasoning reflected political reality more than legal theory. He enjoyed enormous popularity at court, commanded the loyalty of much of the Stormlands, and soon secured the support of House Tyrell through his marriage to Margaery Tyrell. Highgarden brought not only prestige but also the vast agricultural wealth of the Reach and tens of thousands of soldiers under Lord Mace Tyrell. Cersei suddenly faced not one Baratheon claimant, but two, each threatening the Lannister regime in different ways. Why did the North become involved when its original demand was justice for Eddard Stark? Because Joffrey transformed a political hostage into a martyr. After confessing to treason under pressure, Ned expected exile to the Night's Watch, according to the arrangement negotiated by Varys, Cersei, and others hoping to avoid further bloodshed. Instead, King Joffrey unexpectedly ordered Sir Elend Payne to execute him before the crowd gathered outside the Great Sept. In the novels, Cersei herself is shocked by the decision and immediately realizes the catastrophe unfolding before her eyes. She had intended to neutralize Ned. Joffrey ensured the North would never forgive House Lannister. The execution at Baelor's Sept changed Robb Stark from a rebellious son into a king. The Northern banners had already assembled at Winterfell and marched south after Ned's arrest, joined by many of the River Lords through House Tully. Following Ned's death, the Great John Umber famously rejected kneeling to either Joffrey or Stannis. Instead, the assembled Northern lords proclaimed Robb Stark king in the north, reviving a title absent since Torrhen Stark had knelt before Aegon the Conqueror almost 3 centuries earlier. Cersei had secured one throne in King's Landing, at almost the same moment another ancient kingdom declared itself reborn. Why did Cersei continue to survive while enemies multiplied across every border? Because her opponents rarely cooperated with one another. Robb Stark marched against the Lannisters in the Riverlands rather than sailing directly toward King's Landing. Stannis and Renly each insisted upon their own claim instead of presenting a united Baratheon front. Balon Greyjoy watched events unfold from Pike, considering how House Greyjoy might benefit from renewed chaos after the failed rebellion he had led against Robert years earlier. Dorne remained cautious, still nursing old wounds from the deaths of Elia Martell and her children during the sack of King's Landing. Every rival had reasons to hate the Lannisters. Few had reasons to trust one another. This division became Cersei's greatest ally, even though she had not created every part of it herself. Martin repeatedly shows that successful rulers often inherit fortunate circumstances as much as they create them. The War of the Five Kings did not become 5 separate conflicts because Cersei planned every rivalry. Long-standing grievances already existed between great houses, ambitious lords pursued competing goals, and personal pride prevented compromises that might otherwise have united the opposition. Cersei recognized these fractures and never attempted to heal them. Divided enemies required less effort than united ones. Why did Tyrion Lannister become one of the most important figures in Cersei's political life, despite the hatred between them? After Jaime's capture by Robb Stark at the Battle of the Whispering Wood and Tywin's continued campaigning in the Riverlands, the Lannisters needed capable leadership inside the capital. Lord Tywin therefore sent Tyrion to King's Landing as acting hand of the king in his own name. The decision humiliated Cersei. She believed herself fully capable of governing as Queen Regent for Joffrey. Instead, their father entrusted daily authority to the younger brother she despised above all others. Their rivalry quickly became one of intelligence rather than open violence. Tyrion understood almost immediately that the small council leaked confidential discussions, but identifying the traitor required more than accusation. He told 3 different counselors 3 different plans concerning Princess Myrcella's proposed marriage. Grand Maester Pycelle heard she would marry Robin Arryn in the Vale. Lord Varys heard she would be sent to Dorne. Peter Baelish heard she would be offered to House Tyrell. Only Pycelle repeated his version directly to Cersei, allowing Tyrion to expose the elderly maester as the immediate source of one leak. It remains one of the cleverest demonstrations of political testing anywhere in the novels. Why is that scene so revealing about Cersei herself? Because it shows both her strengths and her limitations. She correctly valued information and sought to learn everything discussed by the small council. That instinct was entirely sound. Yet she relied upon informants instead of constructing the kind of layered deception Tyrion instinctively employed. Tyrion did not simply wait for betrayal, he designed an experiment that forced the betrayer to reveal himself. Cersei appreciated intelligence gathering, but Tyrion consistently proved more willing to manipulate the flow of information itself. Meanwhile, another struggle unfolded beneath the surface of the royal family. Joffrey grew increasingly cruel, delighting in humiliating Sansa Stark, abusing servants and exercising authority simply because he possessed it. Cersei defended nearly every action he took, convinced that strength required severity. Tyrion repeatedly attempted to restrain the young king, even striking him publicly after Joffrey ordered the beating of Sansa. Their disagreements reflected two profoundly different understandings of power. Cersei believed fear created obedience. Tyrion believed unnecessary cruelty manufactured enemies. Why did Cersei continue believing she controlled events, even as the kingdom drifted toward catastrophe? Because from her perspective, the most immediate threats had been overcome. Ned Stark was dead. Joffrey sat the Iron Throne. Jaime still lived despite captivity. Tywin commanded the largest remaining Lannister army in the field. King's Landing remained under royal control, protected by formidable walls overlooking Blackwater Bay. Yet beyond those walls, forces were already moving that no queen could fully command. Ravens crossed the sky day and night. Armies marched along the King's Road and the river roads, and somewhere on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon prepared the fleet that would soon carry the greatest challenge Cersei had yet faced directly to the gates of the capital. Why did Cersei survive the greatest assault on King's Landing while contributing surprisingly little to the battle itself? The answer exposes one of the most misunderstood moments in her political career. Many remember the victory on the Blackwater as a triumph for House Lannister as a whole, and it certainly was. Yet when the fighting actually began, the city's salvation depended less upon Cersei's decisions than upon Tyrion's preparations, Lord Tywin's timing, and alliances forged far from the capital. Cersei's greatest contribution was psychological. She kept the royal court from collapsing into panic while others struggled to keep the city itself from falling. The death of Renly Baratheon dramatically altered the balance of the war before a single ship reached Blackwater Bay. Renly had gathered one of the largest armies seen since Robert's Rebellion, drawing strength from the Stormlands and the Reach. Before he could march on King's Landing, however, he was assassinated outside Storm's End under circumstances that remain among the most unsettling episodes in the novels. Brienne of Tarth witnessed a shadow with Stannis Baratheon's face strike the fatal blow, while Melisandre of Asshai later revealed enough to suggest that blood magic played a decisive role. Martin intentionally leaves elements of the event mysterious, but the political consequences were unmistakable. Renly's followers divided between Stannis and House Tyrell almost overnight. The Tyrell decision changed the war more profoundly than Renly's death itself. Lord Peter Baelish traveled to Bitterbridge on behalf of the Lannisters, negotiating an alliance with Lord Mace Tyrell. The agreement rested upon marriage. King Joffrey would set aside his betrothal to Sansa Stark and instead marry Margaery Tyrell, while Sansa would eventually wed Sir Willis Tyrell, heir to Highgarden. The arrangement united the immense wealth of House Lannister with the enormous manpower and harvests of the Reach. Cersei did not negotiate these terms personally, but she understood their importance immediately. Sometimes the cleverest move in politics is recognizing an excellent alliance even when someone else creates it. Why did Tyrion prepare for the siege in ways Cersei rarely appreciated? Acting as hand, Tyrion recognized that Stannis possessed the stronger fleet and a disciplined army hardened by years of service. He ordered the construction of a massive chain stretching across the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, hidden beneath the river until the decisive moment. He also worked closely with the Guild of Alchemists, led by Halline the Pyromancer, to produce enormous quantities of wildfire. This strange green substance dated back to the days of the Targaryens, when the Pyromancer's Guild enjoyed royal favor under kings fascinated by fire. King Aerys II had infamously planned to use hidden wildfire caches to burn King's Landing rather than surrender it. Tyrion intended to employ the same weapon with far greater precision. Cersei distrusted wildfire almost instinctively. She remembered Aerys's madness and understood how easily such a substance could destroy friend and foe alike. Yet she also realized that opposing Tyrion openly while Stannis advanced would weaken the city's defense. Their relationship during these weeks became increasingly bitter. Each believed the other dangerously arrogant. Tyrion considered Cersei ruled by fear and suspicion. Cersei believed Tyrion constantly undermined her authority while secretly pursuing ambitions of his own. Neither fully understood how much they actually depended upon one another. Why did Cersei choose to remain inside Maegor's holdfast instead of directing the defense from the walls? Because she understood something few soldiers wished to admit. If the city fell, the battle would not end at the gates. Maegor's holdfast represented the Red Keep's final defensive position, protected by thick walls, drawbridges, and fortified towers constructed after Maegor the Cruel's reign. There Cersei gathered Queen Selyse's daughter. Shireen was absent on Dragonstone, but Joffrey's young siblings, Tommen, had already been sent safely to Rosby, leaving Myrcella in Dorne, and only the women of court, noble children, attendants, and frightened servants within the holdfast. The queen's task became preserving the dynasty should the outer defenses fail. One of the darkest moments in A Clash of Kings unfolds not on the battlefield, but inside those secure stone walls. Cersei speaks privately with Sir Elend Payne, the royal executioner who had taken a vow of silence years before, after King Aerys ordered his tongue removed. She instructs him that if Stannis captures the castle, he must kill her before allowing her to be taken alive. She also keeps poison close at hand. In the television adaptation, this idea expands into a scene involving Tommen, but in the novels, the emphasis rests upon Cersei's own determination. She's watched enough history to know what victorious armies often do to defeated queens. Better death than humiliation. Why does Cersei spend so much of the battle drinking wine instead of issuing commands? At first glance, the behavior appears reckless. Yet Martin uses these chapters to reveal fear beneath confidence. Cersei entertains frightened ladies with increasingly sharp humor, mocks heroic ideals, and slowly empties cup after cup while trying to project certainty she no longer feels. She is not directing armies because she has no military experience comparable to Tyrion or Stannis. Instead, she attempts to hold together the fragile emotional world inside the holdfast. Every scream from outside, every messenger arriving with conflicting reports, every tremor beneath the walls reminds everyone that the fate of an entire dynasty may be decided before sunrise. Meanwhile, the true struggle unfolds along the river. Stannis' fleet sails into Blackwater Bay, expecting a straightforward assault. Tyrion waits until much of the attacking force has entered the river before unleashing wildfire from specially prepared vessels. The explosion consumes ships, sailors, and the river itself in towering sheets of emerald flame. Moments later, the great chain rises across the mouth of the Blackwater, trapping surviving vessels inside the inferno. Even so, Stannis refuses defeat. His soldiers continue landing and eventually storm sections of the city walls with extraordinary determination. Few commanders in Westerosi history display greater personal courage during an assault. Why did the Lannisters ultimately prevail after coming so close to disaster? The answer arrived from two directions at once. Tyrion personally led a sortie through the Mud Gate after King Joffrey abandoned the walls at Cersei's urging, rallying defenders who had begun to lose heart. During the fighting, Sir Mandon Moore of the King's Guard suddenly attempted to murder Tyrion, almost certainly acting under secret orders, though the novels never confirm whose. Podrick Payne intervened just in time, killing Moore and saving Tyrion's life. At nearly the same hour, Lord Tywin Lannister and Sir Garland Tyrell reached King's Landing with the combined strength of the Westerlands and the Reach, striking Stannis' exhausted army from the rear. The battle was over. When dawn finally spread across Blackwater Bay, the city still belonged to Joffrey. Songs would later celebrate Lord Tywin's victory and praise King Joffrey's courage far beyond what the truth deserved. Tyrion received little gratitude despite planning the defense that had made survival possible. Cersei saw confirmation of a lesson she had long believed. History does not always reward the cleverest mind or the bravest sword.
More often it remembers the figure seated upon the throne when the smoke clears, while the people whose choices truly shaped the outcome disappear quietly into the shadows behind the crown. Why did Cersei begin losing political ground at the exact moment House Lannister appeared stronger than ever? From a distance, the years immediately following the Battle of the Blackwater looked like the height of Lannister supremacy. Stannis Baratheon had been driven back to Dragonstone. Robb Stark remained trapped in a difficult war far from King's Landing. House Tyrell now stood beside the Iron Throne instead of against it. Lord Tywin resumed his office as Hand of the King, bringing experience unmatched by any living statesman. Yet beneath that impressive surface, Cersei sensed something unsettling. For the first time since Robert's death, she was surrounded not by enemies outside the walls, but by rivals sitting beside her at the council table. The greatest of those rivals was not Tyrion, but her own father. Lord Tywin returned to King's Landing after the Blackwater, with the authority of a man who had once again saved the realm. He immediately resumed control over finance, military policy, appointments, diplomacy, and the daily business of the crown. Meetings that had once centered upon Cersei increasingly revolved around him. Even King Joffrey, reckless though he remained, rarely challenged Tywin openly after witnessing his grandfather's absolute confidence. Cersei discovered that political influence could disappear without any formal decree removing it. One capable man entering the room could quietly overshadow a queen. Why did Tywin repeatedly refuse to treat Cersei as an equal, despite admiring strength above almost every other quality? His conversations with her reveal one of the central contradictions of House Lannister.
Tywin clearly recognized Cersei's intelligence. He also knew she possessed determination, courage under pressure, and a willingness to make difficult decisions. Yet he remained convinced that pride often clouded her judgment. He repeatedly dismissed her proposals, corrected her in council, and spoke to her as though she remained a daughter rather than a political partner. In one of the most revealing exchanges, he bluntly tells Cersei that she is not nearly as clever as she believes herself to be. The words wound her more deeply than insults from any enemy. Tywin's solution to political problems almost always involved marriage. He ordered Tyrion to wed Sansa Stark, thereby strengthening Lannister claims over Winterfell through her inheritance. He arranged for King Joffrey to marry Margaery Tyrell, securing the alliance with Highgarden. Finally, he informed Cersei that she herself would marry Sir Willis Tyrell, heir to Highgarden, binding the two greatest houses in Westeros together permanently. From Tywin's perspective, these were elegant political settlements. To Cersei, they represented another reminder that even as queen, she remained a daughter expected to obey. Why did Cersei resist the proposed marriage so fiercely? Because it threatened everything she'd spent years protecting. Marriage to Willis Tyrell would remove her from the center of power in King's Landing and carry her to Highgarden, where House Tyrell, rather than House Lannister, dominated every decision. More personally, it would separate her permanently from Jaime. Cersei argued passionately against the arrangement, appealing to her father's pride, her own position as queen, and practical concerns about governance. Tywin dismissed each objection. In his eyes, individual desires always ranked below the interests of the family. Ironically, the very philosophy that had made House Lannister powerful now became unbearable when directed against Cersei herself. Why did Margaery Tyrell immediately become the focus of Cersei's suspicion? The answer reaches back to Maggie the Frog's prophecy spoken decades earlier. Margaery was young, beautiful, graceful, politically skilled, and adored by the small folk. She distributed food during shortages, smiled easily at crowds, rode confidently through the city, and understood the importance of public affection. Cersei saw not merely a new queen-to-be, but the living embodiment of the prophecy's warning. Whether Margaery truly intended to replace her in every respect mattered very little. Cersei already believed a replacement had begun. The written histories encourage readers to notice how differently Margaery and Cersei approached influence. Cersei often preferred command backed by fear or unquestioned authority. Margaery cultivated affection. She surrounded herself with cousins such as Mega Tyrell, Eleanor Tyrell, and Alla Tyrell, creating an image of warmth, youth, and openness. Noble ladies gathered happily around her apartments, while singers praised her beauty throughout King's Landing. Even Joffrey, difficult for anyone to manage, appeared fascinated by his new bride. None of this necessarily reflected manipulation, yet from Cersei's perspective, every smile looked carefully calculated. Why did the purple wedding transform Cersei's thinking more completely than Robert's death ever had? The feast celebrating Joffrey's marriage to Margaery in 300 AC should have marked the triumph of House Lannister and House Tyrell united beneath one crown. Instead, it became one of the most shocking murders in Westerosi history. Joffrey drank from the great wedding chalice, began choking violently before hundreds of guests, and died in agony before anyone could save him. Confusion swept through the throne room. Musicians fell silent. Nobles shouted conflicting accusations, and the celebration dissolved into terror. Once again, Cersei's world changed in only a few heartbeats. Cersei reached her conclusion almost immediately. Tyrion had handed Joffrey the poisoned cup shortly before the king collapsed. Their long history of mutual hatred made the accusation appear obvious. She publicly denounced her younger brother, ordering his arrest before he could leave the hall. Readers eventually learned that the conspiracy actually involved Peter Baelish and Lady Olenna Tyrell, working through Ser Dontos Hollard and Sansa Stark's jeweled hairnet. Cersei never seriously considered such a possibility. Her certainty regarding Tyrion had existed long before evidence entered the picture. The prophecy of the Valonqar had already shaped the verdict in her mind. Why is this one of the clearest examples of Cersei's brilliance becoming a weakness? Because her reasoning began with genuine insight. Tyrion certainly possessed motive. He had been humiliated repeatedly by Joffrey, threatened by Cersei, and treated with open contempt, despite saving the city during the Blackwater. A skilled political thinker naturally considers motive. Yet Cersei stopped there. She ceased asking questions once she reached the answer she most expected to find. The queen, who had once excelled at studying uncertainty, increasingly treated her own assumptions as unquestionable truth. King Tommen, still a young boy, inherited the Iron Throne after Joffrey's death. Unlike his older brother, Tommen possessed a gentle disposition, preferred kittens to swords, and sought approval rather than domination. Cersei viewed those qualities with growing concern. She feared kindness invited manipulation, especially from the Tyrells, whose influence now surrounded the young king at nearly every turn. Marjorie quickly transferred her attention from Joffrey to Tommen, behaving with patience and warmth that contrasted sharply with Cersei's anxious protectiveness. The Queen Mother watched every conversation between them, as though witnessing the prophecy unfold one quiet moment at a time. As night settled once more over the Red Keep, victory no longer felt secure despite Lannister banners flying above every tower. Tywin governed the realm. Margaery charmed the court. Tommen wore the crown. Tyrion awaited trial in chains beneath the castle. Cersei still possessed extraordinary influence, yet she increasingly found herself reacting instead of anticipating, defending instead of calculating. Without realizing it, she had begun fighting not only living rivals, but also the invisible future that Maggie the Frog had whispered into her ear so many years before. Why did Cersei seem to grow more powerful only after losing almost everyone who had restrained her? The answer begins on a moonless night inside the Tower of the Hand, where one crossbow bolt ended the life of the most formidable political mind House Lannister had ever produced. Tyrion Lannister escaped execution after demanding trial by combat, with Prince Oberyn Martell dying against Sir Gregor Clegane despite nearly winning the duel. Jaime secretly freed his younger brother from the black cells beneath the Red Keep. Before fleeing across the Narrow Sea, Tyrion confronted Lord Tywin in the privy, learning that Shae had become his father's lover. 2 quarrels ended in 2 deaths. Tyrion strangled Shae with the hand's chain, and then killed Tywin with Joffrey's crossbow, leaving the realm without the man who had held the Lannister Empire together. Tywin's death transformed Cersei's position overnight. For years, she had lived beneath the authority of a father who questioned nearly every major decision she proposed. Now, no voice remained powerful enough to overrule her inside the royal family. Tommen sat upon the Iron Throne as king, but he was still a child. Jaime had returned from captivity, changed by loss, reflection, and the amputation of his sword hand. Tyrion had vanished into exile, blamed throughout the realm for regicide and patricide alike. Cersei finally possessed what she had believed she wanted since childhood. The difficulty was that absolute freedom also removed the last experienced hand guiding her away from costly mistakes. Why did Cersei immediately begin replacing capable officials with people she personally trusted? Her reasoning followed a clear pattern. She had watched Varys disappear after helping Tyrion escape, and she interpreted his flight as proof that hidden enemies surrounded every council chamber. Pycelle remained loyal to House Lannister, but had often favored Tywin's authority over hers. Littlefinger had departed for the Vale after marrying Lisa Arryn, leaving the capital without its most unpredictable schemer. Cersei therefore concluded that competence mattered less than unquestioning obedience. It was a decision many rulers throughout Westerosi history had made. Few benefited from it for long. One of the most striking appointments involved Qyburn. Once a Maester of the Citadel, Qyburn had lost his chain after conducting forbidden experiments upon living human subjects. During the War of the Five Kings, he entered the service of House Bolton at Harrenhal before eventually attaching himself to Jaime and then Cersei. Unlike Grandmaster Pycelle, Qyburn never lectured the Queen about precedent or restraint. He listened carefully, answered respectfully, and embraced problems other learned men declared impossible. Cersei valued results above reputation. In Qyburn, she found a servant whose loyalty seemed personal rather than institutional. Why did Cersei continue believing that everyone around her underestimated her? Because many of them genuinely did. Members of the small council often remembered her as the queen who had once stood behind Robert, then behind Joffrey, and later beneath Tywin's shadow. Few appreciated how much she'd observed during those years. Cersei herself repeatedly compares her thinking to Tywin's, convinced she inherited his political instincts more fully than either Jaime or Tyrion. The tragedy is that this confidence rested upon something partly true. She possessed many of Tywin's strengths. She simply lacked his patience. That difference appeared immediately in her treatment of the council. Rather than encouraging debate, Cersei increasingly preferred agreement. Lords who questioned her judgments found themselves ignored, dismissed, or replaced. She elevated Orton Merryweather to the office of Hand after his wife, Taena Merryweather, became one of her closest companions. She promoted men whose gratitude she expected to outweigh their experience. Every appointment strengthened her personal authority in the short term. Every appointment also reduced the number of voices willing to challenge dangerous ideas before they became official policy. Why did Cersei's fear of Tyrion grow stronger after his escape instead of fading with his absence? The Valonqar prophecy never truly allowed distance to become safety. Tyrion had vanished somewhere across the narrow sea, but Cersei imagined him lurking behind every setback that followed. A missing servant, an unexpected rumor, a disappointing report from distant castles, each became possible evidence that her younger brother had returned in secret. The irony is striking. Tyrion spent much of a dance with dragons, struggling merely to survive his own exile through Pentos, the Rhoyne, and Slaver's Bay. Yet inside King's Landing, he occupied more of Cersei's thoughts than many people physically present at court. Another subtle change emerged in her relationship with Jaime. Before his captivity, Jaime had often accepted Cersei's judgments almost instinctively. His experiences in the Riverlands, his journey with Brienne of Tarth, and the loss of his sword hand had altered him profoundly. He began thinking more independently, questioning old assumptions about honor, family, and identity. Cersei expected the brother who had always mirrored her desires. Instead, she found a man slowly becoming someone else. Their conversations grew shorter, colder, and increasingly filled with disappointment neither wished to acknowledge aloud. Why did Margaery Tyrell become an obsession rather than simply a political rival? Every public success achieved by the young queen reinforced Maggie the Frog's prophecy in Cersei's imagination. Tommen adored Margaery's kindness. The small folk cheered when she appeared in the streets. Noble ladies gathered eagerly around her apartments. Even members of the King's Guard seemed more relaxed in her company than in Cersei's presence. Objectively, Margaery was strengthening the popularity of the crown. Subjectively, Cersei saw the gradual theft of everything she believed belonged to her. Prophecy transformed ordinary court politics into deeply personal warfare. The queen therefore began searching not merely for weaknesses but for crimes. She encouraged investigations into Margaery's household, questioned servants, and relied increasingly upon Taena Merryweather's gossip. Evidence mattered less than possibility. If Margaery could be discredited, imprisoned, or disgraced, the prophecy itself might somehow be delayed. Martin quietly illustrates how fear reshapes intelligence. A brilliant mind still notices details, but it begins arranging those details toward conclusions it already wishes to reach. Cersei remained perceptive. She had simply become selective in what she allowed herself to perceive. Why did no one immediately recognize that the balance of power inside King's Landing had quietly shifted? Because outwardly the realm appeared stable, Tommen remained king. The alliance with Highgarden endured. Stannis had retreated north after his defeat on the Blackwater, eventually answering the Night's Watch's desperate appeal at the Wall. The Riverlands slowly emerged from years of brutal campaigning after the Red Wedding shattered Robb Stark's kingdom. Peace, at least compared to earlier chaos, seemed finally within reach. Yet beneath the polished floors of the Red Keep, Cersei was constructing a government increasingly shaped not by careful calculation but by suspicion, certainty, and the growing conviction that only she could truly see the dangers surrounding the Iron Throne. Why would one of the sharpest political minds in King's Landing willingly restore the greatest internal threat the Iron Throne had faced in centuries? At first glance, Cersei's decision appears almost impossible to explain. Since the reign of King Jaehaerys I, the faith militant had remained disarmed after long and bitter conflict between the crown and the faith of the Seven. Nearly 300 years of Targaryen kings had maintained that settlement because every ruler understood the danger of allowing an independent religious army to exist beside the royal one. Yet Cersei chose to undo that carefully preserved balance. She believed she was setting a trap for House Tyrell. Instead, she quietly built the instrument of her own downfall. The circumstances encouraging that decision were very real. The Iron Throne owed enormous sums to the Faith, the Iron Bank of Braavos, and numerous wealthy creditors throughout the realm. War had devastated harvests, emptied treasuries, and interrupted trade across much of Westeros. Pilgrims crowded the roads, refugees filled King's Landing, and increasing numbers of poor small folk sought guidance from an austere preacher who would become known simply as the High Sparrow. Unlike many earlier septons, he embraced poverty completely, walking barefoot, sleeping among common people, and condemning the corruption of both nobles and clergy alike. His reputation spread rapidly because he seemed to live exactly as he preached. Why did Cersei believe the High Sparrow could be controlled? Because she judged him according to the political habits of noble lords instead of the convictions of a religious reformer. Throughout her life, she had watched ambitious men seek offices, lands, marriages, castles, or titles. The High Sparrow wanted none of those things. He accepted the office of High Septon only after the deaths of his predecessors had left the faith in turmoil, and he consistently presented himself as a servant rather than a prince of the church. Cersei mistook humility for weakness. She assumed gratitude would naturally follow royal favor. The bargain itself looked attractive. Cersei agreed to forgive much of the crown's enormous debt to the faith in exchange for restoring the ancient military orders known as the Warriors' Sons and the Poor Fellows. Before Jaehaerys I had reconciled throne and sept, these armed religious organizations defended pilgrims, enforced religious discipline, and occasionally challenged royal authority directly. The conciliator had understood that no kingdom could comfortably tolerate two independent military powers claiming obedience from the same people. Cersei remembered only the immediate political opportunity. She imagined armed devotees investigating Margaery Tyrell and weakening House Tyrell's influence over young King Tommen. Why did the investigation initially appear to confirm Cersei's strategy? Because evidence, or what seemed to be evidence, began arriving exactly where she hoped. Using information supplied by Osney Kettleblack and encouraged through increasingly desperate schemes, Cersei sought to convince the faith that Margaery had committed adultery. In truth, the plan itself was deeply flawed. Margaery rarely found herself alone, constantly surrounded by cousins, ladies-in-waiting, singers, and attendants, whose presence made secret affairs extraordinarily difficult. Nevertheless, the High Sparrow agreed to question witnesses rather than dismiss the accusations outright. Cersei interpreted this willingness as proof that the faith now served her interests. The High Sparrow, however, investigated everyone according to the same standard. Once testimony began accumulating, uncomfortable questions reached beyond Margaery. Osney Kettleblack eventually confessed not only to lying but also to committing adultery with Cersei herself after severe questioning. Whether every detail emerged through voluntary confession, manipulation, or spiritual pressure matters less than the political consequence. The faith no longer viewed Cersei as a patron. It viewed her as another sinner, standing beneath the judgment of the Seven. The queen, who believed she had unleashed holy justice against her rival, suddenly discovered that justice had no intention of stopping where she wished. Why did Cersei fail to anticipate this reversal when she had correctly predicted so many political developments before? Because the High Sparrow refused to behave like a political player. Lords normally weighed advantage against loyalty. Merchants weighed profit against risk. Littlefinger calculated opportunity. Varys considered stability. The High Sparrow measured conduct against religious doctrine. Once Cersei stood accused of fornication, false witness, and other offenses condemned by the faith, previous favors became irrelevant. In his understanding of the world, souls mattered more than crowns. Cersei had entered negotiations believing every institution ultimately served politics. She had overlooked one that sincerely believed politics should serve something higher. Her arrest came with astonishing speed. Members of the faith militant entered the Red Keep under lawful religious authority and informed the Queen Regent that she must answer the charges. Cersei expected resistance from the King's Guard or intervention from Tommen. Instead, she found hesitation everywhere. Sir Meryn Trant and Ser Boros Blount remained bound by conflicting duties. King Tommen, still young and deeply influenced by both his mother and his new wife, lacked the confidence to challenge the faith directly. The walls of the Red Keep suddenly seemed much smaller than before. Authority that had appeared absolute dissolved into uncertainty within a single afternoon. Why did Cersei repeatedly expect rescue instead of admitting the depth of her predicament? Partly because rescue had always come before. Tywin had solved impossible military situations. Jaime had risked everything for her repeatedly. The Lannister name itself had often frightened lesser opponents into retreat. Inside her cell beneath the Great Sept, Cersei continued believing that someone would surely arrive to restore the proper order of the world. Days became weeks. Her gowns grew loose as food dwindled. She lost track of time beneath cold stone ceilings where candles burned low and prayer echoed through narrow corridors. For the first time since becoming queen, rank alone accomplished almost nothing. Martin's chapters inside Cersei's imprisonment reveal a remarkable psychological transformation. She remembers triumphs, justifies old choices, curses enemies, fears Tyrion, recalls Maggie's prophecy, and gradually begins confronting memories she'd long buried beneath confidence. The physical discomfort is severe, yet the greater punishment comes from helplessness. She can neither command armies nor direct councils nor reward loyal followers. Information, once her greatest weapon, scarcely reaches her cell at all. The woman who had spent years trying to control every rumor must now survive almost entirely on uncertainty. Why is this episode so important when judging Cersei's intelligence? Because it demonstrates that brilliance alone does not guarantee victory. Her original instinct had contained genuine strategic logic. House Tyrell truly was accumulating extraordinary influence through Margaery's marriage to Tommen. The faith genuinely possessed moral authority among the small folk that rivaled royal prestige. Strengthening one force against another could have worked under different circumstances. Cersei's fatal mistake lay elsewhere. She believed she could predict every player's motives because she assumed everyone valued power as she did. The High Sparrow valued righteousness above advantage, and that single misunderstanding unraveled years of careful political success. Far above the dark cells of the Great Sept, the bells continued marking the passing hours exactly as they always had. Merchants opened their stalls in Flea Bottom, Ships entered Blackwater Bay with grain and wine. Ravens departed the Red Keep, carrying news across the Seven Kingdoms, and King Tommen struggled to rule a realm increasingly slipping beyond his grasp. The game had not ended because Cersei fell. It merely continued without the player who had once believed she understood every move before it happened. Only one piece remained beyond the High Sparrow's reach, hidden inside the quiet chambers of Qyburn, where a silent giant in white armor had not yet revealed the full purpose for which he had been created. Why does Cersei emerge from imprisonment, weaker in body, but paradoxically more dangerous than before? The answer lies in what she loses and what she refuses to surrender. Her months beneath the Great Sept strip away comfort, certainty, and much of the confidence that once bordered on arrogance. They do not remove her determination. If anything, humiliation sharpens it into something harder and colder. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, Cersei is no longer the queen who believed every problem could be solved through intimidation alone. She has learned that institutions, faith, rumor, and public opinion can wound a ruler as deeply as swords. Her release comes only after Qyburn presents an unexpected solution. Acting as the new master of whisperers, he informs the court that Cersei will confess to certain lesser sins, while denying the more serious accusations of incest and high treason. The Faith agrees to release her into the custody of the Red Keep until a trial can determine the remaining charges. The arrangement satisfies neither side completely. The High Sparrow retains legal authority over the unresolved accusations, while the Crown regains physical custody of the Queen Mother. It is not a victory. It is a pause before another confrontation. Why does Cersei agree to confess at all after resisting so fiercely? Because survival sometimes requires accepting losses that pride alone cannot bear. Her confession admits to adultery with Sir Lancel Lannister after King Robert's death, and to certain other moral failings. Importantly, she does not confess to bearing Jaime's children or to betraying Robert during his lifetime. Those denials remain central to her defense. Martin presents the scene with careful attention to Cersei's inner struggle. Every admission feels like surrender, yet every denial preserves the political foundation beneath Tommen's reign. She chooses the smallest sacrifice capable of preserving the larger claim. The Walk of Atonement that follows has become one of the defining scenes associated with Cersei, and it exists in both the novels and the television adaptation, though with differences in detail and emphasis. In the book, she walks barefoot from the Great Sept of Baelor to the Red Keep through streets crowded with thousands of spectators. Septas cut away her hair, leaving her head nearly bare, and she proceeds unclothed while cries of shame echo around her. Rotten fruit, insults, mud, and filth accompany nearly every step. Yet Martin spends less time describing the crowd than describing Cersei's changing state of mind. Physical suffering gradually gives way to relentless determination simply to reach the castle alive. Why is the walk politically as important as it is emotionally? Because the queen who returns to the Red Keep is no longer protected by the illusion of invincibility. Every merchant, soldier, servant, and noble in King's Landing has now witnessed the ruler of the realm reduced to an ordinary human body, capable of pain, exhaustion, and fear. Medieval authority, both in Martin's world and in history, depended heavily upon spectacle. Coronations, tournaments, royal entries, and public ceremonies reinforced the distance between monarch and subject. The walk destroys that distance in a single afternoon. Even those who pity Cersei cannot entirely forget what they have seen. Why does Qyburn's greatest creation become so important precisely at this moment? Waiting inside the Red Keep is the Silent Knight, introduced as Sir Robert Strong. Officially, he is presented as a massive warrior who has taken sacred vows of silence. No one claims openly that he is Sir Gregor Clegane, though the implication is extraordinarily strong. Gregor had been mortally wounded by Oberyn Martell's poisoned spear during Tyrion's trial by combat, and Qyburn had requested custody of the dying knight's body for mysterious medical treatment. Robert Strong never removes his helmet, never eats before witnesses, never speaks, and possesses frightening physical strength. Martin deliberately refuses to confirm every detail, yet almost every reader reaches the same conclusion. Cersei immediately recognizes the value of such a champion. Trial by combat remains a lawful means of resolving accusations under both royal and religious custom. If the faith insists upon judging her through combat, Sir Robert Strong can stand in her defense. Here, for perhaps the final time in the published novel, Cersei demonstrates genuine strategic clarity. She cannot erase the accusations. She cannot easily manipulate the High Sparrow. She can, however, exploit the legal traditions of Westeros themselves. Rather than attacking the system directly, she prepares to defeat it according to its own rules. Why has Jaime become almost a stranger by the time Cersei most desperately needs him? Their correspondence during a feast for crows reveals just how dramatically both siblings have changed. Cersei repeatedly writes to Jaime, begging him to return to King's Landing and defend her. Jaime, commanding Lannister forces in the Riverlands after the fall of River Run, receives one of her letters while camped near Pennytree. Instead of riding immediately to her rescue, as he once would have done without hesitation, he reads the letter beside a fire and quietly throws it into the flames. It is one of the most significant symbolic acts in Jaime's entire character arc. The bond that once seemed unbreakable has finally begun to fracture. Why does this rejection matter more than almost any military defeat Cersei has suffered? Because throughout her life, Jaime represented certainty. Kings died, hands changed, alliances shifted, armies won and lost battles. Jaime remained constant. Now even that certainty has disappeared. Cersei still believes that her brother belongs beside her because that belief has shaped her identity since childhood. Jaime increasingly believes that remaining beside Cersei may prevent him from becoming the man he wishes to be. Their emotional separation mirrors the political fragmentation of House Lannister itself after Tywin's death. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, the political landscape remains astonishingly unstable. Kevan Lannister has restored a measure of order as regent, repairing many of Cersei's earlier mistakes through patience and cooperation with House Tyrell. King Tommen still reigns. Margaery has been temporarily released pending her own trial before the Faith. Across the Narrow Sea, Daenerys Targaryen struggles to rule Meereen while her dragons continue growing. In the north, Stannis Baratheon campaigns against the Boltons after marching south from the Wall. Then Varys quietly returns to King's Landing and murders both Grand Maester Pycelle and Kevan Lannister, explaining that peace would delay the coming invasion of the young man he calls Aegon Targaryen. Chaos, he believes, serves his chosen king better than stability ever could. Why, after everything you have heard, do so many readers still argue that Cersei was one of the smartest players in the game? Because both sides of the argument contain undeniable truth. She outmaneuvered Eddard Stark. She understood the importance of timing better than many celebrated commanders. She recognized that appearances, succession, fear, and information shaped kingdoms as surely as armies did. Yet she also became trapped by the very habits that once made her formidable. Prophecy narrowed her vision. Pride silenced useful criticism. Suspicion replaced investigation. Martin never portrays Cersei as foolish. Instead, he presents something far more interesting, a remarkably intelligent ruler whose greatest opponent gradually became her own certainty that she could no longer be wrong. Why, after tracing every triumph and every mistake, does the argument that Cersei was the smartest player remain so difficult to dismiss? Because intelligence, in George R.R. Martin's world, is never measured by perfect success. If it were, every clever character would simply win. Instead, Martin fills his history with brilliant rulers who misjudge one decisive moment. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen fails to foresee the political consequences of Lyanna Stark's disappearance. Tywin Lannister underestimates the hatred growing inside Tyrion, and even Petyr Baelish repeatedly depends upon risks that have not yet reached their conclusion in the published novels. Cersei belongs within that same company. Her failures do not erase her brilliance. They reveal the precise point where brilliance becomes vulnerable to pride. Measured purely by accomplishments, her record remains extraordinary. She preserved the secret of her children's true parentage for nearly 15 years, despite living inside the most closely watched court in Westeros. She recognized Eddard Stark's intentions before he acted and survived the confrontation that destroyed him. She navigated Robert's reign without allowing a husband who despised politics to uncover the greatest deception in the kingdom. She maintained the position of Queen Regent through the deaths of Robert and Joffrey, the imprisonment of Jaime, the arrival of Stannis, the War of the Five Kings, and the constant maneuvering of Littlefinger and Varys. Few political figures in the saga endure so many crises without losing power altogether. Why then do so many readers rank Tywin, Tyrion, Varys, or Littlefinger above her? The answer usually centers upon adaptability. Tywin changes strategy when circumstances change, abandoning King's Landing during Robert's rebellion, only to return at the decisive hour. Tyrion constantly experiments, testing assumptions instead of defending them. Varys spends decades preparing for futures most people cannot even imagine. Littlefinger turns defeat into opportunity with astonishing speed. Cersei adapts as well, but increasingly only after events force her to do so. As the novels progress, she begins protecting conclusions she has already reached instead of questioning whether those conclusions remain true. The contrast with Tyrion deserves special attention because the twins' younger brother becomes her intellectual mirror. Both understand that information outweighs brute force. Both appreciate the importance of timing. Both can read fear in other people almost immediately. Yet Tyrion usually assumes he might be missing something, while Cersei gradually assumes she already understands everything essential. that small difference expands into a vast gulf over time. Curiosity continues sharpening Tyrion. Certainty slowly dulls Cersei. Why does prophecy matter so much in evaluating her decisions? Martin repeatedly presents prophecy as something that rarely lies outright but often destroys those who struggle hardest against it. The ghost of High Heart dreams true, yet her visions arrive wrapped in symbols. Daenerys receives cryptic warnings inside the House of the Undying that remain only partially understood. Melisandre sees genuine visions in the flames while frequently misreading their meaning. Cersei hears Maggie the Frog's words as a frightened child and thereafter interprets nearly every important event through that single conversation. The prophecy does not command her actions directly. It quietly shapes the questions she asks, the enemies she notices, and the dangers she overlooks. Many readers have wondered whether Cersei herself helps fulfill the very future she fears. Had she welcomed Margaery Tyrell instead of treating her as an inevitable rival, the alliance between House Lannister and House Tyrell might have grown even stronger. Had she not become consumed by Tyrion as the Valonqar, she might have devoted greater attention to Varys, whose plans continued unfolding beyond the Narrow Sea. Had she never restored the Faith Militant, the High Sparrow would have possessed far fewer tools with which to challenge royal authority. These remain interpretations rather than established canon, yet they fit one of Martin's recurring themes. Fear often creates the future it desperately wishes to avoid. The published novels also invite caution before reaching absolute judgments. Cersei's story remains unfinished. The Winds of Winter has not yet revealed the outcome of her trial, the role Sir Robert Strong will ultimately play, or how she will respond to the invasions already beginning to reshape Westeros. Young Aegon Targaryen has landed in the Stormlands with the Golden Company, claiming to be the son of Prince Rhaegar rescued from the sack of King's Landing. Daenerys Targaryen still commands 3 living dragons across the Narrow Sea. Euron Greyjoy pursues ambitions that stretch beyond ordinary kingship. The game has entered a new phase, and Martin has deliberately left Cersei alive to face it. That unfinished state also explains why the television adaptation and the novels eventually diverge so sharply. The HBO series carries Cersei's story well beyond the point where the published books presently end, giving her victories, defeats, and a final fate that belong to the adaptation rather than to Martin's completed written canon. Any judgment based primarily upon the novels must therefore stop where A Dance with Dragons stops. At that moment, Cersei remains dangerous, politically wounded, psychologically transformed, and very much alive. Her greatest moves, and perhaps her greatest mistakes, may still lie ahead. So was Cersei truly the smartest player in the Game of Thrones? The fairest answer is that she understood the game more clearly than many of her rivals, but never fully escaped herself. She grasped that kingdoms are ruled through perception as much as law, through secrets as much as armies, and through timing as much as courage. Those insights carried her farther than almost anyone expected. Yet the same mind that saw hidden threats everywhere slowly lost the ability to distinguish genuine danger from imagined betrayal. Intelligence remained. Balance did not. The candle in the Tower of the Hand has nearly burned itself away. Outside the narrow window, Blackwater Bay reflects scattered lights, exactly as it did when our journey began, and King's Landing settles once more beneath the quiet weight of the night. Somewhere below, guards change watch upon the walls, ravens sleep inside the rookery, and the Iron Throne waits for the next pair of hands convinced they alone understand how to hold it. Cersei Lannister once stood beside that window, believing every move had already been calculated. In the end, the greatest mystery was never whether she was clever enough to master the game. It was whether anyone, no matter how brilliant, could ever master a game that changes the people playing it as surely as they change the world around them. If you stay with this story a little longer, one quiet pattern begins to emerge. George R.R. Martin rarely suggests the kingdoms are won by the strongest sword or even by the sharpest mind alone. Again and again, his histories show rulers who master one part of power while overlooking another. Cersei Lannister understood fear, appearances, succession, and the hidden value of information more clearly than many of the celebrated statesmen around her. Yet she gradually forgot that power is never something a single person possesses forever. It is a current flowing endlessly between kings, queens, councils, armies, faith, memory, and the countless ordinary people who decide, each in their own small way, whether a ruler deserves to be followed. Perhaps that is why Martin fills his world with echoes rather than simple victories. The Targaryens believed dragons guaranteed their dynasty until dragons disappeared. House Stark believed honor would always protect the innocent until honor met politics in King's Landing. House Lannister believed wealth could secure every future until gold could no longer purchase trust within the family itself. Cersei inherited the greatest strengths of her house: pride, determination, intelligence, and the refusal to surrender. She also inherited its oldest weakness. The Lannisters often believed they could command loyalty long after they had stopped earning it. As you look back across her life, it becomes difficult to separate the woman from the prophecy that haunted her. Did Maggie the Frog truly shape Cersei's destiny? Or did Cersei spend decades shaping herself into the very person the prophecy required? Martin never offers an easy answer, and that silence is one of the story's greatest strengths. In his world, prophecy rarely acts like chains fastened around unwilling hands. It acts more like a whisper that grows louder every time someone listens to it. The future becomes dangerous not only because it may come to pass, but because fear slowly persuades people to build it themselves. There is another quiet truth hidden beneath all the wars, councils, betrayals, and crowns. Every ruler eventually discovers that governing others demands first governing oneself. Tywin could command kingdoms but never heal his own family. Robert conquered the 7 kingdoms but never escaped the memory of Lyanna Stark. Tyrion could read the ambitions of strangers while struggling to escape the wounds left by his father. Cersei saw deception in nearly every face before her, yet gradually lost the ability to question the story she told herself. Intelligence remained her greatest gift until certainty transformed it into something much more fragile. And so the candle burns lower once again in the Tower of the Hand. Beyond the narrow window, Blackwater Bay lies quiet beneath the night. The same dark water reflecting the same distant lights that greeted you at the beginning of this journey. Somewhere below, the city continues breathing as it always has, indifferent to the hopes of queens and the ambitions of kings. The stone walls endure longer than any dynasty, the sea remembers longer than any chronicle, and the game goes on for another generation. You leave Cersei standing beside that fading flame, still watching the sleeping city she fought so fiercely to control, while the silence slowly settles over King's Landing once more.